What's going on, everybody? My name is Cynthia Frelund, and I work for the NFL Network as an analytics expert. Now, analytics analyst is technically what I am. So I'm an analyst who uses the lens of data to help interpret football. So Moneyball for football. And the reason I get to be called an expert is because analytics analyst is significantly harder to say. So we just keep it easy and call me an expert. I'm so excited to be here with you virtually. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I will be in Pittsburgh on the 21st as the draft starts on the 23rd, as you all know. So speaking of the draft, it is the most data intensive talent evaluation process in my opinion, all of sports, but every single sport has this draft moment. And it's so interesting right now, specifically because, as I'm sure all of you college fans also recognize, we're at this weird inflection point where now that NIL has been instituted and has been in effect for a number of years, and then of course the transfer portal where everybody is moving schools, we have this whole different set of data. We have older players entering the draft. We have players whose resumes are far thinner than they used to because, as you know, let's say a quarterback switches from team to team, do they really have time to learn all of the installs and everything that's required of that position? So this is probably, in my opinion, the coolest draft to date, because it's obviously in Pittsburgh. But in addition to being in Pittsburgh, I just think this is where the guys who are the data haves will really shine, and the ones who are the data have-nots or not adopters, I think they'll struggle because, as we kind of see here, we live in a data substrate. So your ability to dial in and tell the right stories with the data helps you find the right players. The right players make the game easier to play. We know how this all funnels down. And of course, now that we have 10 years of next-gen stats, which are the NFL's proprietary tracking stats. They use this little thing right here. This is the chip that's in the shoulder pads, the ball one's a little bit different shape. It's in the pylons. These are RFID chips, so they use radio frequency to deliver a lot of GPS components, but not just like a GPS like you'd think of with like your Fitbit or whatever with that tracker. It has a little bit more sophistication in here as well. It kind of works on a grid matrix. So let's just talk about the draft specifically. So in April 23rd this year, the franchises all have to start making up to $1 billion? No, okay, we'll probably be by the end of this draft class. Those guys will make a ton of money, but ultimately they have to make a lot of money bets on all of the different players that are coming into their franchises. So we've already seen in free agency, this year's free agency has the most trades to date. As of this recording, which is the day before, we have 19 trades, and that's already a historic pace. So you have a limited salary cap. Everyone has to work within the same framework of money. So the decisions you make about the draft are really important because the benefit of the rookie pay scale, the ability to pay just these defined amounts, which are far lower than the contracts that come after, which are massive. Those are really important inputs because since we all have the same amount of money to work with, every team has the same amount of money to work with, getting those rookie pay scales, especially at the most valuable, highest cost positions, really change your capacity to add wins to your game. So we have over 300 prospects that go to the combine. The combine is actually not the only place that you're going to be deriving talent. You probably saw the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Bowl. Some of those kids from the East-West Shrine Bowl don't even get invited to the combine. You have pro days where all of the pro communities travel out. Notre Dame just had one today. That would be the day before this speech. And you'll see all of the different prospects. Obviously, they have a running back there that everyone's really interested in. So there's a lot of things that go into this. And oh, by the way, there's also 30 visits where teams will fly in players. They get to choose 30 players to bring into their facility, do an interview on their literal turf. And this first round is where we see a lot of concentration. But if you look at where the value lies, the value we've kind of organized the NFL, and as much as teams will pretend like they each have a different way of valuing a first round pick, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, they all use this thing called the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. So it comes up with this fake amount of, equity that can be traded for one position or another. And it pretty much falls within those contexts, even though teams are like, no, I have my own, don't worry, it'll be great. But ultimately, the first round hit rate is not great. It's about 50%. So about half of the players get into your criteria where they outlast the league minimum. You heard me right. So 4 years is about where people last. We are not great at necessarily hitting in the first round. So if that's your expectation, about half get to that second massive contract. Some will, and then I've also added in that 50% figure the ones who get a second contract, like these quarterbacks but they're not starters, right? So they've fallen out of where they were expected to go. Then you look at the opportunity here for figuring out these lower round picks. So as much as we have the first round, you're like, oh no, don't be a bust. You also have these guys in the lower rounds who can outperform any metric that you have for them. So the question then becomes, how do we get better at predicting who will perform better and take the field and use those player minutes to really convert into the potential that we were hoping for? Now, I will say, I mentioned the transfer portal and I mentioned a lot of those other things just a second ago, but they're very real. We'll see this year if that changes the hit rate, especially in early rounds. And of course, perception often drives reality. Of course, there's a perception in this draft that there's really one top quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, who is, if you believe media, he's already basically a Raider, and we should just all accept that. I do believe that. But then after that, there's this big fall off in the next quarterbacks. However, a quarterback's salary is so high that potentially you would draft them in the first round. Why would you take that risk? Well, when you're looking at contract negotiations, first round draft picks, they get an extra 5th year of eligibility. So you get to keep them for 5 seasons as opposed to a second, third, all the way down. They only have a 4-year first contract. So you get an extra year of flexibility at the most expensive, most valuable position around. So these bad picks, I'm looking at a number here and that's a pretty lofty number, but when you're talking about high-level Thursday night picks, why is that number so big? Well, number one, it translates to ticket sales or tickets not being sold. That's the best way to say it. I do math. I don't do grammar here. And then it translates to drops in watching in primetime video. Like if you have a better team, you get more of those primetime slots. You sell more ads, you get more recognition as people come to the game, etc. There, that nice flywheel goes in the right way. So it can be very costly to pick the wrong player. Now, moving on to where this success metrics, where are we even deriving data from? The combine. Of course, the combine is one of those places where we talk about all of the time. It is the underwear Olympics. We measure everything. But is it a great source of success? The 40-yard dash, of course, for some positions it's great. But when's the last time you've seen an offensive lineman run 40 yards? If you're seeing that, something is horribly wrong. So 5% is about the highest number I can conceivably put on this slide and say the combine potential 5%. Maybe that explains 5%. It's not great. And that's the 40, of course, we talk about that, but other things as well. So the point is, and I will tell you after going to the combine and being part of this system, the combine it's part of the job interview in the same way a lot of us took the SAT or the ACT a million years ago. It is one data point on a whole career worth of data. They already have their film from their colleges, especially if they went to big schools. People are very familiar with their game. So when you get to the combine, it's really just a check the box situation. Of course, this year we hear a lot about Ohio State running back Carnell Tate running a horrifyingly slow 4.5240. Okay, so they want him to be under 4.5. They want all of the guys, the wide receivers in the first round, they want them to run under a 4.5040. Doesn't matter. Ask DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins ran, I think, a 4.54. Many of these guys who you know and love the most, they're the guys who run in the 4.5s. Now, if he were horribly slow, like if he ran a 5.96, something crazy like that, then we could have a talk. But being out of range, oh, and let's talk about arms for a second here. I will get back to this arms thing. But when we talk about being out of range, the ranges need to be based on your height. They need to be based on what is being asked of you. So a lot of teams will get this, this data that's in a vacuum, the absolute data values, and then they'll put it into their own models. So each team does have proprietary models that include everything from how fast they're running on the field with pads, God forbid, like in actual games, to how they performed at the combine, but kind of with an asterisk or brackets around the things that they're trying to select for. They really want to look at an offensive lineman's feet, for example. They want an offensive lineman to be able to move their feet laterally very quickly, etc. They can zoom in on that while they're doing a 3-cone drill, like something like that, right? So shuttle, things like that. So it's really more, yes, it's part of the lore and the history of the NFL. And I love the combine because the amount of times that we talk about arm length and being 1/8 of an inch off, like that drives me insane, but it's part of what I love about it. It is a job where people care about 1/8 of an inch for Ruben Bain's wing. You can't even see my wingspan in this video, but Ruben Bain's wingspan is 1/8 of an inch off of where they think the smallest is. Now, let's just think about this for a second. If you're bench pressing a lot, think about what that does to your muscles. If it's cold in there, he plays in Miami. He's used to Miami. He's in Indianapolis, and I can tell you it was very cold this year. Your arms, 1/8 of an inch, it's not a T-Rex arm situation. So ultimately, there's no one source of data that predicts for success at the career at the next level. Just like in all of your professions, your college degree probably didn't necessarily correlate with your prediction with your ability to succeed at the next level. There's something there that helps predict for success, but I was a biology major, so it's not necessarily like just one data point that that predicts everything else. Even though it would be nice if we could have fewer data points to help us point to these things. But to me, the cool part is more isn't better. It's refining what I want. So having things make sense. And just to take a quick step back about my career and how I got into all of this. I was that biology major and I loved the science of things. I like validating proofs, all these things. But I realized that medical school was not for me. My sister's a doctor. You can imagine how that went family-wise. And we moved on. Ultimately, I loved telling stories. I worked in the finance world. I got a chance to work in private equity, which was very, very cool. And you basically got a chance to look at a whole bunch of data and find the story. What data points are most important? How do they all reflect on the future potential for X, Y, or Z? And then I loved that when you're in this financial role, you have to respect time. You can't let perfection stand in the way of making a good decision. So figuring out that the denominator of time was always really important to me as well. A lot of people in my profession come from statistics backgrounds and they're far more like they want to be right. I just want to be right enough, but I always say that I want to be right enough. I'd like to be 10% better. Think about it. If you're 10% better on every single football game, that is 1.7 games. If you were in the NFC South, that is like blowing away everybody because it seemed like none of those guys wanted to win. So just think about that. 1.7, so 10% better every single game. Now, how you use the data. This is my please figure out your framework to each team. Every single NFL team has a different framework. Some teams, like the Steelers, have invested time, resources, and energy into figuring out a framework that suits them well, that combines it combines technology, so technology innovations, everything from creating their own models to in-house kind of software, I'll call it, that they build and use and utilize to make these decisions. Because remember, at the draft specifically, you only get a certain amount of time to make a decision or call people to make trades. So the 10 minutes on day one, that's the longest you get, and that's the fastest. And then, of course, on day 3, it goes even faster. So you have to be able to make fast decisions, but keep your draft board intact with your priorities intact in a very dynamic environment, a very fast changing environment. So this is where quantitative skills and qualitative context come together. If you build a better model that more identifies what is a Steeler, you have a better chance of selecting for Steelers. It's never going to be perfect. Remember my 10% adage. You just need to be 10% better, and then you have a nice edge against your opponents. Even though they're kind of all given the same data, it's my way of discerning the data and fitting it with my current roster of players to find that the average, to me, the best you can do in football, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, you're going to have some elite players. You're going to have some not elite players. Let's call those players, if elite is bucket 1, bucket 5. But the majority of your roster is going to be, 2s, 3s, and 4s. That average is just the law of averages. That is the way it works. But in my system, if the guys I am paying like average players at their position perform to a level that is above average, then I win. I want everyone to perform above where I'm paying them, not because I am an underpayer or I'm cheap or anything like that, but because my system does a better job of selecting for traits that maximize the thing that they're most efficient at and minimize the thing that are not necessarily their strengths. As of right now, you have to also put that in the context of what is the general football world doing? So right now, in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of duo, which like running between next to the center on either side. It's kind of like what we did in high school. I'm from Michigan. We played a lot. I feel like Pittsburgh and the Midwest, like we're all Midwesterners, right? Isn't that how this works? Anyways, so you run right up the gut. That has been what kind of has been going on in the past couple of seasons. Why? Because a lot of guys pulled linebackers off the ball to create more space. So there's a pendulum will swing from offense to defense, and ultimately this pendulum swinging has now provided a situation where I think what we should see going forward is probably a little bit more zone. So outside rushes, perhaps like the Chiefs could be signaling that to us. They spent a lot of money on Kenneth Walker, a lot of money relative to his position on Kenneth Walker, a guy who will allow them a little bit more of that outside zone gap scheme that will change what the Chiefs are doing. So the Chiefs, who are at the forefront of, sometimes you see like they used to play like a really wide formation, then they played this compressed formation. Kyle Shanahan does this too. He's at the beginning of everything. I'd like to give you the new Mike McCarthy stats, but we don't necessarily have them yet. And we don't even have it for the Ravens either, who are another team who uses a ton of analytics. The Browns use a lot of analytics, but they use it in a much different way. I'll get to that in 1 second here because I think it is pretty keen. But ultimately, what you want to be, what are the decisions that you want to be making? In my opinion, the teams who do the best job, they select for traits that they want to be doing, and then say, what can I live with as the other side of that trait? Meaning, if I want a guy who's very good at outside zone rushing, then I probably need to have a tackle that's able to set that edge for my running back. If I spend all my money on my guards and then I'm trying to run outside, the trick will probably get old pretty quick. I mean, it might work a couple of times, right? But it's far more likely if you have the pieces at each position that complement each other and the strategy that you're trying to run. Great. Now, let's talk about this in the job pool. So in many ways, in the same way you're trying to pick applicants for jobs in your roles, in your companies, there are a lot of resumes that look pretty similar, and you don't even get film on the people that you have to choose from, but we have film. We can see what happens. Does everyone play, in the Big Ten? Not necessarily, but you get a lot of good film, even though there's like 10, 11 games, which is still a very small amount. Having that film, then you get to interview people, then you get to figure out all of these different things. Like a lot of the best teams in these interviews, they'll ask players they'll say, this is the play. Show me what your responsibility is in this and in this specific situation. So the player will have to say, ideally, like the ideal response would be like, this is play X, where my responsibility is to get to the outside of the right guard, and then I can choose at the end if I want to go outside the tackle or not based on the leverage that the linebacker is showing me. I'm making something up, but ultimately regurgitating what was said so they can see how did they listen, and then 2, how did they think through the decision. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can do it with their bodies, but being your mind in it. Now, if you have the film and you've seen them do it, then you can kind of validate that whole process. So it is a quick interview. It is interview based on a lot of very small sample size data points, but it's the best we got. So you got to be better at selecting for traits that you want at the next level because everybody's got the data. So this is where AI has been insane. Because you can go online now. There are so many publicly available databases of draft data for so many years now. The question is, what patterns actually matter? That's a great question, especially now that college film is so different because of the transfer portal, because these players are now, well, of course, conference realignment was massive as well. And it's hard to necessarily know what was being called. But here's the thing. You're kind of never going to know that. So everyone is handicapped in the same way on that regard. So some people do have a little bit more scheme familiarity, etc. And of course, having years and years of expertise in, calling plays or being defensive, coordinating, if any of these things, they have some familiarity with what the concepts were. Do they know exactly what was called? No, but they have a good idea. So you can say, all right, on this route, what was the most efficient place that my running back should have done for blocking, that my wide receiver, was it a post? Was it a hitch? And did they get separation from the defender that was coming after them? Or did the defender not pick them up? Was it a busted coverage, etc.? Now you can take that and then you can map it to things that, if you look through historical amounts of data, were correlated to successful plays for the offense or defense or whatever you're looking at. So you can now do something that used to be manual, and they had this thing, it's called the cowboy kicker, and it's like a quick rewind button. I imagine it having that TiVo noise, boop, 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 boop. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. I'm just dating myself here. But they have this cowboy clicker, and they can just go back and watch a lot of data. They grind the film. Well, is it the best use of your time? Maybe, but probably not. You can also get through a lot more footage, a lot more of the things that matter without and take out a lot more of the things that don't. If you have a good sense of what's going on, my cowboy clicker, it works. Okay, great. I'm still clicking. Here it is. And now, instead of watching 4 games, I can watch tinier pieces that are more relevant to my particular, who I'm looking at to evaluate, and I can do it in half the time. And I also have, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm super fascinated by the idea of how do I think at 10 in the morning versus 10 at night? How do I think if I've just eaten or if I had a big workout? All of these things change my perception of what I'm seeing. So if I'm now able to be so streamlined and have some of the data take out my bias and help me see things for what they are, good and bad, meaning here's the plus of this player, here's the minus of this player, and I can be more neutral in my assessment. Are the assessments going to get better? Now, I feel like maybe there's got to be some really smart people in the room who could do this whole study for me and then just tell me what the answers are, because that would be wonderful. But if I had a lot of extra time, that is something I would really spend my time doing. But the point is now you can take more relevant data and present it to a coach in a smarter and more efficient amount of time. So if I have an hour, now I can get through 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as much as I used to be able in an hour. And again, I have to imagine there's a second order effect of it being more mentally better for someone than rewatching the same thing over and over again, at least fresh or less biased. I don't know. Again, unfounded, there's my asterisk. That's my belief. That's my bias coming in. But I ultimately think if you're able to look at more efficiently, you are able to see things in a better light. I don't know. I got to believe it. Anyways, so the point is how do you make better informed decisions? Well, a model is only as good as 2 things. What it was trained on. If you're looking at only plays from 1950 NFL, you're probably not going to get a model that's very relevant for today. I mean, further, if I'm looking at only plays by the Ravens, if I only had the Ravens informing my model, then teaching my model, then I'm not going to be able to really create a model that's really properly configured for Patrick Mahomes, because they play much different style. Let's take it a step further. Matthew Stafford, a guy who doesn't really run at all. So ultimately, your model's only as good as the data that it's trained on. That's the first thing. It's only as good as your ability to ask it, program it for what you want it to tell you, and ask it the right questions. So just like we're hearing with every other part of AI, what is it that I'm asking? What am I asking the model to return? And how can I be specific about what I want? If you were just to go on an LLM, so a language model that's trained on language, a pattern that is not necessarily numerical, right? A large language model finds patterns in language to say, who are the Ravens going to draft? Okay, you're a Steelers fan, you're trying to peek. Maybe it didn't know about Max Crosby's trade failing or all of those things. So maybe it's going to tell you, maybe it doesn't have, I don't know, up-to-date salary cap information, etc., because there's a lot of data that needs to go into it. So you can't, it was probably going to return to you something like they were bad at pass rushing last year, so they need even more than even if it knew Trey Hendrickson was coming. But it depends on what it's trained on. That's the first thing. I've seen a lot of mistakes in LLMs when it comes to sports. Number two, what am I asking it to tell me? Well, am I just saying in general? Because then it's going to give me maybe it would give me a summary of what some beat writers have been saying for a long time. I'm not sure. I guess my question is, how do I create a model that uses data points that would give me some version of, if I'm the Steelers and I'm looking to improve my wide receivers, we got some wide receivers coming in, but we can always use some more here. What's the situation? Aaron Rodgers threw the most passes in under 2.5 seconds of any quarterback last season. Who can I draft to help Aaron Rodgers succeed? The point is you don't want that answer coming from LLMs, because language is a lot of beat writers, a lot of people, even if they have great knowledge. You want it to come from something. If I'm a team and I'm looking to use analytics in any way and AI in any way, I want numbers to help me narrow down decisions so my human lens can take it. So and make the decision on my own with narrowed down information that fits my criteria. So what you're doing is you are not replacing a scout's judgment. You're just challenging pieces of it. So you can confirm, you don't want to just confirm the thing you already know. You want to create this paradigm where you're saying, this is something the data that reveals that may not be what you were thinking about. And this is something that the data shows that may be a concern that you should at least address, so you're ready for it. I don't necessarily think that there's an answer here. There's not one form of AI that's going to do it all for you. And if you spend the time to program something to help be a little bit more a faster way of narrowing things down, you can save a bunch of time, but you're never taking the human out of the decision. That is the thing. If there's one thing I want you to remember from me being this tiny little circle in the corner of your screen, you're never taking the human out of the decision. You're trying to empower the human to make a better decision, or at least know when they're making a low probability decision. I can't judge the merit of my decision if I don't really remember what I made the decision on. So being able to take this information and say, this is how I structured it, columns and rows. This felt right to me in the moment. Then in the future, I can go back and say, I was duped by this before. Let's just challenge my own decision-making process to improve it. Or this worked for me in the past. How did I get to that? How can I refine it for this new set of data going forward? It's just really it's a map. You don't really know how to navigate if you don't know where you are on your map. So this applies to every organization. So it's always about potential. Let's see, I'm trying to think if I've known anything's a home run. All right, okay, it's probably a home run to know very high level execs, right? If I'm a brain surgeon and I'm the best brain surgeon in the world and I switch to a new hospital, they probably know they're going to get some good brain surgery results. But for the most part, you're going to scout for potential. And at the draft, you are certainly, this one's about potential. Potential. You want to minimize your downside with this AI impact on the draft, as opposed to only search for upside. Or at the very least, be smart about, it's the 7th round. Heck, I'll throw in a full upside pick. Who cares? Because this one feels like I'm really happy with where my roster is. I get 90 people going into training camp. I brought in some free agents that sound amazing. Let's just go for upside with this last pick. So I don't know. The point is to know where you are on the map so you can make the decision. For these high level decisions, for your managers, for the people who are really going to be leaders in your organization, the first round picks, first, second, third round picks, the guys, you need to be there. Your day ones, get on the field, of our 53-man roster, you have 22 starters, right? I need you to be one of those 22. Those decisions, maybe you could consider AI to help you minimize your downside risk. However, you don't even really know what that risk is unless you take context into consideration. So yards per route, interesting. Jackson Smith-Njigba signed the highest wide receiver contract on an annual basis in the NFL. He reset the market this past week. Now, everyone will keep resetting the market because that is just what happened with wide receivers. But a lot of what was his special sauce really wasn't in like the stats that they'll use to promote him. He had like a great yards run per route. He had a long depth of target. They were throwing deep balls to him. But if you had to ask me what the difference about JSN was and what therefore, if I were his agent crafting a narrative to the Seahawks, I just probably showed them the Super Bowl ring, but I haven't gotten them yet, but you get what I'm saying. But when you're looking at those contracts and you're trying to evaluate how to pay these guys, it's really the combination of his ability to create separation, be physical when he's not the subject of a pass, and again, create that separation to give himself he's an extremely precise route runner. In fact, a lot of the guys from Ohio State, that's like what they're known for. Carnell Tate, back to the draft. But he's a very precise route runner. He creates that separation. He was great deep. He was great short. But the thing I liked the most about him was his versatility. Last year, he led the league in yards from the slot. This year, that number, not from the slot. So out wide, that's the other place that you can line up. So his versatility, he's not just a one-trick pony. He's a all route tree kind of guy. And that's going to be immensely valuable going forward because now you have the versatility with him to create. They have a new offensive coordinator coming in because their offensive coordinator is now the head coach of the Raiders. So they'll have a new strategy. Same quarterback in Sam Darnold, but they have a new starting running back. Zach Charbonnet is still there, but Kenneth Walker is at the Chiefs. And now you have this ability to have JSN inside, outside. They just have to account, defenses are going to have to account for him on every single route. So context really, really matters. You're probably not best served paying a wide receiver that can't play all of the positions, the top end money that you saw for Jackson Smith-Njigba, if they can't do all of the things that you're going to need that position to do. So it's really about adding context to every decision. Now, here's my, again, let's see if I point. No, I got to point this way. That one. Speed of a decision. That's the competitive weapon. I told you I come from a banking background, so the denominator of time really, really mattered. You have to also remember that the average NFL lifespan is under 4 seasons. So some of these decisions, of course, you have a long time to really think through your first round decision. But after that, it's pretty fast. It comes at you fast, and perhaps a trade for a player. Maybe we'll see AJ Brown get dealt in the draft yet again. He was already dealt during the draft when he came from the Titans to the Eagles. Perhaps that. So how do you value that? Because I want to know, okay, what would I be willing to give up for him? We just saw a pretty massive trade for Jalen Waddle. He went from Miami up to the Broncos, and that trade was a first round pick. The Dolphins get a first round pick, a third round pick, and then they swapped 4s for Jalen Waddle services. Is AJ Brown worth more than Jalen Waddle? That's a question that you may have to answer in under 10 minutes. So this is where having your model and having more than okay, so all right, if we trade for AJ Brown, then all these wide receivers on our board, we don't want to consider another wide receiver again until round 6, something like that. You need to know those if-then scenarios so you can make the best decision possible with time as this very, very fast. It's slow. It feels slow. Free agency feels slow, maybe. I don't know. I think it does a little bit. But then it goes really fast when it comes to the draft. So you got to act, baby. You got to act. And then last but not least, so the role. Let's talk about how, let's go with I hate to bring up the Ravens here, but let's go with the Ravens. Actually, all right, we'll go through it. Lamar Jackson has a very particular set of skills. So having Lamar Jackson it's a big loss for him losing that center in Tyler Linderbaum. He's now Raider. And having tight ends that can catch the ball, huge. Isaiah Likely being a giant now is also a massive loss for him. So having those like shorter options creates a more versatile situation for Lamar Jackson. Why? Because you've already got speed and Zay Flowers, and it's just a different format. Now, then you think about the Steelers. So let's assume Aaron Rodgers comes back. I mean, Mike McCarthy said something like, it would be great for us to have a reunion. And they did not seem to be active in free agency in a way that would suggest there's a different quarterback. So I'm not reporting anything. I am just fully guessing here. But let's pretend Aaron Rodgers is back. Aaron Rodgers now is back. Aaron Rodgers, before the line, at the line of scrimmage, before the ball is in his hand, so the moment it's snapped to him, he makes probably like 550 decisions in that 2.5 seconds before he gets the ball in his hands. And he's a master at it. This is why he's a multiple time MVP. He'll walk into the Hall of Fame. Like this is why he's so special. So what are you going to get him weapon wise? You got him a little bit of reinforcements in the wide receiver position, but I mean, if he wants a top tier tackle, get him one. Whatever he needs, I would probably support however he wants to play the game. So Aaron Rodgers would probably tell someone what he wants to do. It very likely doesn't include him running in any way that looks like Lamar Jackson. So it's going to be a different configuration. Therefore, what you value in a right tackle or in a running back for Aaron Rodgers' skill set is going to be different than that which you value for even for Lamar Jackson's, because you're just going to have, so they choose having Derrick Henry there. So you have this like ultimate confusion factor, but in general, the kind of running style for those two guys would be very, very different. So you want to know the role. You don't necessarily want to say, okay, they played at Ohio State, so I'm going to take the Ohio State kid in a role I don't need, compared to the Toledo guy in a role I do need, etc. So point being is, not only do you have the bias of these big schools, you got to get that out of your head, but also you have to know what are the traits that you are selecting for. Don't let the name on the jersey, on the front of the jersey, bother you. Make sure it's the skill set that you saw during the game, during the play. Look, I did some homework. Huh? Okay. So this is like embarrassing because I haven't done any sort of PowerPoint presentation in a really long time, but here we go. So 2030 is like what I found. And again, if I'm wrong, please just email me. This is my attempt, my going back to the days of when I had to give presentations like this. It's been a while, but ultimately, look, like 2030 feels like a turning point. We love round numbers. Who doesn't? Maybe it happens a little faster, 2028. I'm not sure. But the point is we are knocking at the door of it. So productivity, what are we expecting people to do? A lot of different things. But these two numbers are basically showing that what McKinsey believes and PwC believes is that the world of work is changing and pretty fast. So in a very dramatic way, in much of the same way as the NFL, although positions may stay the same, the role of the linebacker, the role of the safety, etc., those things change. It's a pendulum swinging back and forth in the game of football. But ultimately, body types have changed, being faster changed. Everything is changing. It's just like ours is in a confined space, and the world of work is just a much larger pool to draw from. But we're redrafting, right? You have to sit there, and I find so many parallels between like roster management and your roster management when it comes to figuring out who works for you. What does work mean? How do we need work to change? How are we teaching people? How are we communicating those changes? So the skills, the roles, the people, they're all different. Same thing with football, right? Like the role of the quarterback. A couple of years ago, before Patrick Mahomes got into the league, there was like some dual threat quarterbacks, right? Which Lamar Jackson was one of them. But they're like, now it's kind of like table stakes to be able to also run. It's almost weird to be a pocket passer now. Think of the way Jared Goff, the career arc that he's been on, although it's been better for him, at least from a branding standpoint, to be at the Lions, although he didn't make a Super Bowl there and he did at the Rams. It's a very different, he was this first round guy. They traded the farm for him, the Rams did. And then now I don't know if that same, maybe in this draft, but I don't know if that same thing would be the case because he does not run. So you don't have the dual threat, which seems to be very in vogue right now. So things will change, and ultimately they'll keep changing, because I think that might be the only thing that we can count on, is that change is just going to be the constant. But ultimately, this was my attempt to be back in the day of the kind of research I used to do. So thanks for that. But I just want to leave you with a framework because that is what I believe is the most valuable thing just at all. So we have scouts. Our scouts figure out, our scouts do some pretty cool things like behind the scenes. They'll see how were they nice to the person who cooked the meals, etc. So they do all of those things. Mostly they show talent on the field, but we have them do a lot of cool other things as well. Data helps unite the scouts. The Steeler scouts are some of the nicest people in the entire world. And when I ask them a question about, how are you looking at, if you look at this year, if you're a football person, like there used to be a lot of base defense played in the NFL, 4-3, 43, or 34. That would be the base defense. Now, like nobody plays base defense. So I would ask the scouts, I asked the Steeler scouts specifically, how do you kind of evaluate if a guy can fit your scheme because you're not really playing base defense? And a lot of the answers are very technical. It's like, well, I look for this type of, result against this type of offense. Then in the run game, I look at this and then this. And they have they kind of take a little piece out of a game from college and say, this kind of give me a sample of how it might project at the next level. They don't realize that they're using data, but we won't tell them that. They're going to be totally fine with that. Now, a lot of teams, including the Steelers, they do have predictive frameworks, and all of those frameworks figure out what does success look like? In my world, it's wins and losses, but there are some other things as well. You can't really be success on a win-loss basis if you don't evaluate everything from what the player did on each play to what play was called to are we just facing Patrick Mahomes and we had the right defense called and he just knocked our block off? Like what happened there? So ultimately, what does success look like? How do we model for that? The guys who are better at doing that, they have better results. Now, the contextualization, how the context of everything really, really matters. Okay, so in this game, this is a perfect example. The AFC Championship game in Denver in the snow. The commentators pointed it out and they said, it's snowing and they have white jerseys on the Patriots. So it's very hard for the Broncos to see them. I would argue that it was also confusing because they were playing with a backup quarterback that had not started a game yet that season. Because remember, Bo Nix had gotten hurt the week before. And I think their coach was making more gambling plays. He took maybe bigger risks thinking, I'm playing with this backup quarterback in the same way. We only had 1 week to prepare, et cetera, et cetera. They can't even see anything. Let's just high risk, high reward. I would imagine there's no model that would say go for it in certain situations, etc. But I don't think that the coach would say that he was taking the higher probability outcome either. So I think both of those things can be true in general. So the point is context matters, the model matters, how you're modeling, what you're selecting for, the questions you're asking, and how you're asking the question. All of those things matter. Your scouts input, that is the bread and butter. You absolutely need to have the right data points, the data points that matter to you, and you need to get rid of the ones that don't. So all those things, they all need to work together in order for you to act, make the decision, draft the player, bring in the free agent, call the play, etc. So step one is where the NFL teams are molto bene. 3 would be what I think is probably the biggest detractor from 4. The decision architecture here is very, scouts, they know what their jobs are, so it's pretty clear. Modeling and contextualization, that's where things are murky. Here's my Browns example for you. So when the Browns brought Paul DePodesta of Moneyball fame in, and they did that in 2015 or 2016, of 2015. Ultimately, what happened there is they brought him in and they asked him, figure out how to do all these different things with our quarterbacks, etc. And he did. And he measured a whole bunch of different things. And then did they make the decision? That will be, that's my cliffhanger for you. What was the action that he maybe told them and what was actually happening? So the point is you can have all the thing in place, but you still have to act to make it work. And I will leave you with this. The NFL draft is the biggest test to see if you can see what other people can miss. We will inevitably see the Tom Brady workout pick where he looks flabby or whatever you want to say. But the point is everybody's working with incomplete information. The better your framework, and the people who understand under pressure how to make the best decisions, the ones that they want to make, tend to do better. Of course, I say tend because there's always things like injuries, etc. This is a sport. It's ferocious. It's crazy. But I'm pretty sure that in this world of AI, you can see the parallels in your organization as well. I thank you so much for dealing with me in this little tiny bubble on the corner of your screen. My email is on the screen in front of you, and I do respond to LinkedIn. So both of those things would be great ways to contact me if you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything. I will see you in Pittsburgh. I will be there, actually. At the end of April, I'll be for sure be there on stage hanging out with the newest Steelers, the newest 32 members on the first night, and the rest of the players along the draft. Thank you so much and enjoy the conference.